Jimmy Carter, the nation's longest living president and Nobel Peace Prize winner, has died at age 100. Carter helped the nation recover from an unprecedented government scandal, and he brokered a historic peace deal between Israel and Egypt. Yet a sick economy and foreign policy failures limited him to one term. A man of Christian faith, he might be best remembered for his years of service after he left the White House. Jennifer Wishon looks back on his life and legacy.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute.
When he took the oath of office in 1977, James Earl Carter Jr. brought a breath of fresh air to Washington. A Southern Baptist Sunday school teacher and peanut farmer, the Georgia governor came from nowhere in 1976 to defeat President Gerald Ford.
Good evening. President Nixon reportedly will announce his resignation tonight.
Almost overnight, scandal-weary Americans could put Watergate and the Nixon-Ford years behind them. At home, the Carter years saw the dawn of disco. And overseas, the promise of a vigorous new pope from Poland, John Paul II. With Carter, many evangelicals were thrilled one of their own made it to the White House. He spoke their language, and there was real hope he could turn the country around. Before the '76 election, he talked to CBN founder Pat Robertson.
My faith in Christ has grown with age and with responsibility.
As president, he faced a world full of danger. The Soviet communist menace lurked on every continent.
The number killed in Tehran since the beginning of the month is probably well over 100.
In Iran, more trouble. A revolution led by an obscure cleric, the Ayatollah Khomeini, turned the country upside down. Suddenly, an ally became an enemy. And in November 1979, Khomeini's followers took 52 Americans hostage. A failed rescue attempt ended in the deaths of 8 U.S. servicemen. Critics say Carter's Iran legacy continues to haunt us today.
Building, building, building. Skyscraper.
While elected to control surging inflation at home, it grew even more during his term as interest rates soared and Americans lost jobs.
The erosion of our confidence in the future.
In the summer of '79, he made his famous malaise speech, in which he seemed to blame the country's problems on the American people.
It is a crisis of confidence. It is a crisis that strikes at the very heart and soul and spirit of our national will.
The terrible economy haunted the president's re-election campaign. He was challenged by Republican Ronald Reagan, who told Americans it was time to change leaders.
Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?
But as a former president, he drew admiration for his work championing human rights and charitable causes like Habitat for Humanity.
The world found out about Habitat in 1984 when President Carter and Mrs. Carter rode a bus up from Plains, Georgia to New York City and spent a week sleeping in a church basement and rehabbing a tenement building on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And no one had ever seen a former president of the United States behaving this way.
Carter told Gordon Robertson it was his way of putting his faith into action.
I think it's important for us to actually do things to demonstrate our belief, as Jesus did his whole life. He didn't just preach. You know, his life was devoted to reaching out to the leper, who would be the AIDS victim nowadays, right, or to those who were in prison, or those who were poverty-stricken, or who had a different color skin, like the Samaritans, as you know, or who were sinners.
The 39th president was happily married to his wife Rosalynn for 77 years. The former First Lady, a respected advocate for mental health and human rights, died at age 96 at home in Georgia alongside her husband. Carter was in hospice care when his wife died. Nearly 10 years prior, he defied odds, beating a grim cancer diagnosis. Melanoma had spread to his brain and liver, but just months later, after surgery, radiation, and immunotherapy treatments, he announced he was cancer-free.
So a lot of people prayed for me, and I appreciate that.
Throughout all the battles he faced in life, Carter leaned heavily on his faith.
I think I have been as blessed as any human being in the world.
Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
Nice tribute. Thanks, Jennifer. Well, President Joe Biden has called for a national day of mourning for President Carter on January 9th. Last night, he offered words of praise for his longtime friend.
Today, America and the world, in my view, lost a remarkable leader. He was a statesman and humanitarian. And Jill and I lost a dear friend.
President-elect Trump honored former President Carter with these words on Truth Social. He did everything in his power to improve the lives of all Americans. For that, we all owe him a debt of gratitude. Evangelist Franklin Graham expressed appreciation for President Carter's attendance at the opening of the Billy Graham Library in Charlotte in 2007, posting on Facebook, quote, "He and my father, Billy Graham, had a close relationship. I know that his family would appreciate your prayers."